to order the Denton County Transportation Authority Board of Directors regular meeting. We do have a quorum this morning with Director Eads and Director McGuire currently not available, but we do have the Vice Chair and the Secretary today. Our first order of action is our invocation, which will be led by our Secretary Austin.
Thank you. Thank you, Father, for this glorious day and all the things that we get to see that that you've provided for us to remind us how much you love us, Lord. Father, we thank you for every single person gathered here today, Lord. Father, we know that the steps of the righteous are ordered by you. And Father, I thank you that you have given us the confidence and the responsibility, Lord, to represent our community through this transportation initiatives. Father, I thank you for our staff and the members and our visitors, and Father, just everyone that you bring together to help us in this mission that you've put us in. Father, I also want to remind everyone that April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month, Lord. And Father, that you would heal all of those who, Lord, have experienced these horrible things in their lives, Lord, that we ask for healing for every single person that's been a victim to this. Father, we trust that you will be with us today, Lord. We ask you that you give us your eyes, your ears, your thoughts, Lord, your heart, as we discuss the business of the day for Denton County Transportation Authority. We ask all things in the name of your Son, our Lord. Amen.
Thank you. And now, if you can please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Down to the Texas flag. Honor to the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state under God, one and indivisible. Thank you. I'd like to recognize that Director McGuire has now joined us. The next order is introductions. I do not have any introductions at the director level. Mr. President, Paul, do you have any introductions on your end?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Two introductions would like to make. First, I'd call Ms. Sherelle Evans-Jones to the podium to introduce a couple of new staff members who have joined DCTA since last board meeting.
Good morning. Sherelle Evans-Jones, Chief Financial Officer, and I'm pleased to be here with you to introduce two new members of our team. I have with me, you see him kind of coming in the room, Mr. Joe Oram. He is our new Senior Manager of Contracts and Procurement. Joe comes to us from the city of Fort Worth by way of the city of Santa Clarita, and he spent a significant amount of time with the United States Coast Guard serving in a contracting officer capacity. So he brings a wealth of purchasing knowledge and contract experience, and we're just glad to have you as a part of our team, Joe. And also, who has joined our team is Jane Bilarowitz. She is our Senior Manager of Budget. She joins us from Denton County, where she served in a budget capacity. And another neat thing about Jane is that she's a member of the Louisville University class. So she's learning more about the city and how it works and operates. So both of them joined us on April 10th. I refer to them as our J&J dynamic duo because we have Jane and Joe. So please welcome them. We're glad to have you both a part of our team.
Thank you.
Hey, I'm going to expect you to add the DCTA module to the Citizens University.
No pressure.
How about after budget season?
Okay, after budget.
Thank you both.
And then, Mr. Chairman, I also would like to recognize Mr. Andrew Iddigson from AECom is with us here today. He's been providing some support for some of the intermediate service planning that we're going to talk about later on. So I just want to recognize that he's in the building. as well as say thank you and welcome to all of our guests and visitors who are joining us out in the lobby. So thank you.
Well, that takes us to the next item, which is public comments. This agenda item provides an opportunity for citizens to address the DCA Board of Directors on any agenda items or other matter related to DCTA. Each speaker will be given a total of 3 minutes to address any items. Anyone wishing to speak shall be courteous and cordial. Speakers making personal, impertinent, profane, or slanderous remarks may be removed from the meeting. Unauthorized remarks from the audience, stamping of feet, whistles, yells, clapping, and similar demonstrations will not be permitted. Citizens that are not able to attend in person must email his or her public comment to Keisha Morrison Perkins at dca.net no later than 3 p.m. on Wednesday, April 26th, to ensure that the comments will be distributed to board members prior to the meeting. The board of directors is not permitted to take actions on any subjects raised by a speaker during the public comments. However, the board of directors may have the item placed on a future agenda for action, refer the item to DC administration for the study or action. Briefly, this state existing DCTA policy provide a statement of factual information in response to the inquiry. We do have one written inquiry that was submitted. This was submitted by Alberto Salazar. And his comment is, dear DCTA Board of Directors, in regards to the proposed extension of service for A train to downtown Carrollton Station, I would like to suggest a cost savings measure that may also benefit the riders of DCTA A trains. If I recall, the platform would have to be raised to accommodate DCTA A train. The added cost would be avoided if the rail were to follow the existing curve to the east. If preferred, a second rail following a similar curve could be built. The new platform would be curved, but it would be within a few yards of the new Dart Silver Line platform. This new platform would improve accessibility for passengers transferring to Dart Silver Line to access DFW Airport. Current passengers seeking access to Dart Green Line would still have the Trinity Mill Station as a valid transfer point. Potential future expansions for DCTA, the suggested platform would open up a first recorder to downtown Carrollton Station. Assuming such plans would be entertained, having a well-anchored platform at a key junction would reduce future costs for expansion. Thank you for your time and may God bless you all. Alberto Rene Salazar. I would say thank you so much for the comment, Mr. Salazar. As a point, a factual point, that is something that the staff is actually looking at. So it's a very valid point, and we appreciate your comments. The next, I have two speakers that are here with us today that would like to speak to the board. The first one is Christine Bray, Denton, City of Denton. Ms. Bray, you have 3 minutes.
Is the microphone active?
All right, excellent. Hey, y'all. So first, I wanted to say that I'm happy about a number of DCTA happenings. The stop funding that y'all secured from NCT COG is very exciting. I recently had the pleasure of riding Route 3 with Denton City Councilor Vicky Bird. We left from Mack Park and walked over to the nearest stop, which is in a ditch alongside McKinney, where traffic usually goes about 35 to 40 miles an hour. We stood there with nothing to tell us when the bus came. So the stops definitely need work, and I'm glad that funding has been secured for that. Lack of comfortable and safe and accessible stops prevent a lot of folks from riding. Second, the doubling in frequency for 6 and 7. Great. I don't know if y'all have ever used public transit as a primary means of getting around, but having it come every 20 minutes instead of every 40 is pretty huge. It definitely makes transfers easier, right? If the bus that you want to take or the destination that you want to go to is not along the bus that's near you, you have to transfer. And so if you have to wait 40 minutes for your bus and then 40 minutes for that transfer bus, if it's a really bad transfer, that's not great. And we've been seeing the results of this service boost in ridership, right? Ridership on both routes has doubled compared to this time last year, and it's still trending upwards. And here I want to compare with GoZone. A doubling of resources for buses doubled ridership and reduced wait times by half, because how could it not, right? The bus comes twice as often. So by necessity, wait times are halved. We still need more coverage in town. We still need more safe stops. But when funding is injected into Go Zone, we do get more riders, right? We have that more service that provides more people the ability to get around. But the service quality remains unchanged, right? Because the demand just catches up and then the service quality crashes, right? At Abundance Denton meetings, we've had to print stickers that say, sorry, I'm late, I took a Go Zone, because we've had basically every meeting, we meet weekly for the past 2 months. Somebody has walked in the door and said, like 30 minutes late, sorry, I'm late, I took a Go Zone. So that they don't feel embarrassed, we just have stickers that say that, and it's like, that's not a problem, you win a prize, right? But it would be nice if people could instead take buses and have reliable schedules. So in terms of considering service changes, right? When we consider where should we put resources, we should put resources where it actually improves rider experience, it improves ride quality. And finally, as you consider A-train improvements, just a quick question. Have you guys talked with riders about what they would want? I asked a quick poll last night about what people would like to see for A-train changes. And the runaway winner was actually later service hours. People were big fans of faster rides. They were big fans of more frequent rides, but the one that won was just later hours. So I hope that you guys would be consulting with riders and what would meet their needs as you consider changes. Thank you.
Thank you. And I would say stay tuned for the rest of the board meeting. You might hear something that will address that. Our next speaker is Tracy Duckworth, City of Denton. Ms. Duckworth, we have 3 minutes to address the board.
Push the button, yes.
As long as it's green,
Good job.
you're good.
Okay. I wanted to talk to y'all about the Go Zone service. The major problem is the app. Okay, if I can paint y'all a picture, the best way to do it is if I'm waiting for a Go Zone at my house and you are on a Go Zone. Okay, the problem is when another rider books a ride, you're waiting, you know, you're looking at a 30-minute window already on pickup. Every time a rider is added to the queue for the driver, it's added at the front. So if I'm waiting on a Go Zone and you are on the Go Zone and they are heading towards your stop to drop you off, it could be, you can see it. Another rider or 2 or 3 is added to the driver's queue right in front, right in front, right in front. And so they're going to pass your stop. I mean, when they were heading right to it to drop you off because they have to go pick up these other 3 riders. So my time on pickup gets delayed more and more and more. I watched the Go Zone yesterday come to pick me up. It was 4 minutes away. It passed my house. The next time I looked down, it said 21 minutes away. And then I got in the Go Zone and that started happening. You know, that's what happened. 2 riders were placed in the driver's queue before me. And I was trying to get somewhere. And so this makes the whole system late. It makes the van come later and later to pick someone up. And someone is on the van passing their stop repeatedly to keep picking up new riders that get put in the queue before, you know, what's already happening. The queue, you know, it's not, you know, I thought you were supposed to go, the new people in the queue were supposed to be added to the end. And instead they disrupt what's already happening and add another rider to the beginning of the queue, and that stops, you know, it scrambles everything. The problem with getting somewhere on time that brought me here today is I minister to homeless people who do not go in the shelters, who were on these streets for whatever reason. There are certain times, even the people who need to be at the shelter that I minister to, you have to be there by a certain time. If you are going to Salvation Army or any other organization for dinner, it starts at 5:30. You have to be in line by 5. If you are not, you don't eat. They don't care what your reasoning is. If you were that hungry, you should have walked or got there sooner, booked your Go Zone yesterday, whatever you had to do. And that is not okay. That is not okay. People are losing out on services and check-ins and dinner because of this time. I've missed doctor's appointments. I got in trouble with my job when I had one. A lot of people have lost their job because of this. And that didn't make me as upset as this did. You know, that's just ridiculous. I don't know where my clock is or where my time is, but That's the problem. It's the app. It's the app. It's, you know, and I'm not a technical lady. I don't know how it's supposed to work. I just know it's not supposed to work like that. And that's not working. It's making the whole thing discombobulated. People can't that's why people can't get nothing on time, because that's what the app is doing. So it makes you late to get picked up, late to get dropped off. It makes you, that's what's causing the 2 hour, you know, delivery, of a person to where they're supposed to be. That's what the problem is. And that's all I have. Thank y'all for listening.
Quick question. How did you identify that it was working in this way?
How did I identify it?
Yeah, because did you, I mean, when you see a van go by, we got dozens of vans.
Yes, sir.
Were you able to identify that was the same van going down that
I tell
route?
everybody the same thing. The only way to identify your go zone with them all looking uniform as they do is by the license plate number.
Right.
And so, yes, and you can watch it on the app. Also, you can track your go zone, and you can see the time. And when your time goes from 4 minutes to 3 minutes, and I call in a lot. That's another one thing I want to add, please. It is impossible to get a supervisor to call you back. And you can't be transferred to one. They can request that one calls you back and they don't ever. When I call in, I'll call in the customer service or whatever center, and they will call the driver and ask the driver what happened. And the driver gets upset like they did yesterday when this happened to me and say, I'm just following my cue. I'm following the GPS. And I've been in go zones when I've watched, you can see the driver's phone. They have it up, you know, usually where you can see it, where they can see it too. And you can watch it. And I watch them pass my stop and they say, man, they just added another stop, another pickup, another, you know, that's how observing.
Yeah, super. Well, I was curious how you were
Yes, sir.
picking up on that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The third speaker we have is Liam. And I can't pronounce your last name, Liam. Gauntlet Field. Thank you. Also from Denton. Liam, you've got 3 minutes. As long as it's green, you're good.
Hello, this is my first time here. Happy to be here. Finally have the time for it. But I'm here like to just come out to say like I'm not too knowledgeable about what's going on, like the nitty gritty details on DCTA, but I'm definitely a big fan of like the A train and like the buses and like even the GO zone. The GO zone in itself is not a bad idea. But one of the most important things, like I've tried using the DCTA services. Like when I didn't have a car, I would use the A train to go down to my cousins down in Dallas, who I could walk to, stop down on Mockingbird. But one of the big issues I have is like the reliability for it. It's like there'd be times like I'd go down and then I forget that there's no Sunday service on the A train. So I'd have to have somebody come pick me up at Trinity Mills. And I've had to buddy up in the pouring rain at Trinity Mills because they missed the last train. But the two most important reasons why like people don't take transit is because it's not frequent enough and it's not fast enough to get where they're going. As the previous speaker says, like people are like need transportation, but they also need to get it in a timely manner. It's and like the GO zone's not a bad idea. It's like, and plus it gives us data, helps give us data where people want to go to if it's not served by a bus line. It's like, and you can look at other places where microtransit it is doing well. Like in LA, you have microtransit, which is run by the county itself and employees, and that's hitting record numbers, but it's not the main form of transportation. It uses to feed the buses, feed the trains, but in of itself, microtransit is not enough to service a main city because, you know, induced demand is a lovely thing. But I really do think like DCTA has the potential to really, especially with the connection to the Silver Line, really transform like how we do our transportation in the county. Like I would love to be able to use the buses to trains more, but I just don't have, I can't rely on them. I can't rely on them to be there when I need them to be. Like, I can't use it to come home on Sunday or go down on Sunday to Dallas. I can't rely on them to get home after like 11. So it would be really nice to be able to rely on them and be able to use public transportation of like that I've grown fond of since I've grown up here. Thank you, and I release the rest of my time.
Thank you. So that is all the cards I have right now. So that concludes the public comment period. Next item is the consent agenda. We have 3 agenda items on the consent agenda. Board, do you want to, is there a motion to take it as one or pull any one individually for consideration?
I move approval of the consent agenda as presented.
We got a motion by Director McGuire, second by Vice Chair Gilmore to approve the consent agenda as stated. Any further discussions? If not, all in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Okay, motion passes. Next, we move to our regular agenda item. Item 1 is discuss Denton County Transportation Authority DCTA methodology to identify peer transit agencies. I believe this is Mr. Christina, who will be our presenter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. In this item, we're going to talk through the process that staff has been under to generate a listing of what could be considered as peer transit agencies that will allow staff and the DCTA Board of Directors to accomplish a few things that are listed out here. Number 1, we have an expanded level project in this year's budget to conduct a long-range service plan. As you all know, the last long-range service plan from DCTA was completed in 2012 and is obviously in need of an update. So in the first step of any long-range service plan process is kind of set the framework for what is this agency that we're studying and planning for. And so this process helps us walk into that LRSP that'll happen, that'll be scoped later on this year. The second is, as we think about how to resource the agency with regard to organizational structures, staffing, manpower levels, it helps to understand what other agencies comparable to ours in the country have so that we can use it as a benchmark. It's not a guide, it's a benchmark. We at Denton County are proud of the way that we do things. We feel like we're good stewards and fiscally responsible, and all of those things will maintain our current course, but it is helpful to understand what else happens in the industry. And then the last is speaking somewhat to what the last speaker just talked about. When considering the future potential for DCTA and these great service offerings that we have on individual modes, this gives some context for how DCTA can think about the integration of those modes and the maximizing of those resources moving forward. So to start, I'll point you to the graph in the upper right-hand of the slide, and that's ridership at DCTA since 2011, or the inception of the A train. And what you see in that graph is ridership at DCTA across all modes peaked in the 2017 timeframe at about 3.5 million riders a year. And the trough was right in the middle of COVID there in 2021 at 1.1 million rides. I think we could all pause and be really reflective and proud of the sort of recovery that we see between 2021 and this year, that halfway through the year, we're at 1.5 million rides across all modes. And while the summertime generates a little bit of a lag in our ridership because of the UNT shuttle system, we are in the ballpark of potentially 3 million rides this year. It's probably going to come in somewhere between 2.8 and 3 million, but there's a lot to be proud of there. So if we start by just looking at what are all the agencies in the country that landed in ridership in 2022 in that 1.1 million range to 3.5 million range. And by the way, we're referencing American Public Transit Association data. They publish a ridership report every quarter. And last year, Q4's ridership report generated the data that's in this presentation. What we see is that of the 63 transit agencies that come inside that window, 1.1 to 3.5 million trips, only 6 provided some service other than fixed route bus operations and accompanying paratransit. And those 6 agencies are listed there at the bottom right. So what you see there is you have 2 commuter rail only agencies. You've got some that operate marine ferry, which is inapplicable to us. And then you have in Washington DC, one that operates bus and a light rail system. So again, not a lot of apples to apples to be compared inside that cohort of 1.1 million to 3.5 million rides. So then that means we have to look beyond that window in order to find agencies that start to provide services that look similar to ours. So as we march up the line of after Q4 ridership data from last year, what we see is in the 2.1 to 2.6 million rider range, we end up with 4 agencies that operate fixed route and demand response of some volume. 2 of those, Knoxville and Greensboro, are college towns, so similar to what we have in Denton. And then Colorado Springs and Flint, Michigan show up. Flint, Michigan's got a significant demand response ridership, but the demographics and economics of that area may not look the same as us. But Colorado Springs, Colorado, you see on the front range, small city, suburban context feels pretty similar, but Colorado Springs operates its transit service as a city department. And so that feels a little different than ours. So then after 2.6 million rides, you look at the table at the bottom and you start to see agencies that begin to really do demand response at volume like we do, that begin to do commuter rail like we do, and ending the list at 7.3 million rides total, you see Nashville, Tennessee. So within that range, you've got Ann Arbor, Michigan, State College, Pennsylvania, another couple of college towns that provide some congruence. You have Trinity Metro in Fort Worth, 4.7 million rides from Trinity Metro. Doesn't count the TRE system because that's an LGC separate from both Trinity Metro and DART. So that 4.7 million rides is just what Trinity Metro did. And then Nashville, Tennessee provides a second commuter rail operation for us to consider in this process. Any questions so far? Okay. So now we'd like to just take a look think about the A train and provide some context around what is this A train service that we have and how does it compare to the rest of the country? Well, the first thing is the A train makes DCTA unique amongst transit agencies in the country because there's only 32 agencies in the country operating a train like ours. And what's evident is most of them operate at an overall much larger ridership scale than we do. And so what you see on the table on the left, and I'm sorry, on the upper right, the graph showing ridership on the A train peaked in the 2014-2015 timeframe, which was in the neighborhood of the time where right before I-35E was expanded to multiple lanes. And then you see 2021, the drop in ridership post-COVID. But last year, the train was up 45%. This year, it's up another 30%. So people are coming back to the train, but not as quickly as they're coming into our service overall. And certainly with an asset of this kind of potential, we need to be doing all that we can to leverage it. So the agencies on the left-hand side are the ones that are operating in the range of A train ridership that we did last year at about 184,000 rides in the calendar year. What you see is Trinity Metro at 500,000 rides, serving the second busiest airport in the world in DFW Airport. And that ridership accounts for about 12% of their overall ridership total. You see us, our 184,000 rides is about 8% of our overall ridership total. And then you see Nashville down at the bottom, which we called out from the last slide, similar to us in total ridership, but only 92,000 rides on their railroad and only 1.2% of their total service. Another interesting thing about Nashville is that on paper, their schedule says they operate about 12 trains a day, and it seems like they're hosted by a freight railroad. And so as we provide a full schedule of service all throughout the day, they're limited presumably by their agreement with the freight operator to just serving train trips in the end of day period. Now, one of the things we need to do in this process to continue on is to go and have more conversations with these agencies to understand more about those sorts of details. But right now their schedule is much more limited than ours. And then just for context, not comparables, just context, provided a list of as you go beyond 500,000 commuter rail trip rides north of Trinity Metro, you start to see the types of communities that you get into that are operating commuter rail service similar to ours. Any questions on that? So then our demand response service is another thing that makes DCTA unique. And when we talk about demand response, when APTA talks about demand response, we talk about our paratransit trips, ADA trips, and then also micro transit or GO zone trips. And what you see in the left-hand side of the page is DCTA's total microtransit ridership, and then just a plus or minus 25% of that figure from last year. Accompanying that graph is the number of bus trips that those same agencies generated. So what you see from this list generally is when we're talking about microtransit of this scale, you're talking about agencies that provide a much larger total ridership figure and a network of bus operations that's larger than what we operate today. So then comparing that to this cohort that I identified at the beginning of this of the briefing, you see that those trip counts, our trip counts on microtransit far exceed those of agencies who are in the cohort. And so DCTA is a leader in that regard. Any questions on that? So like the A train or like the commuter rail conversation, there's more conversations to be had about how those agencies deliver those that volume of trips. Some of these surely are contracted services, some of these surely are self-operated services and those sorts of things. But that'll be part of the conversations that we have going forward through the long-range service planning process to provide more understanding. So taking all of that into consideration, what is being proposed by staff, and there's no action for the board to take here. This is really meant for feedback and collaboration on how you all are thinking about DCTA contextually as we think about the future of our organization. From a peer agency perspective, here's a proposal. There are Knoxville and Greensboro, two college towns, arguably similar to ours in Denton, operating fixed route service and about 2.1 to 2.3 million rides from a bus only perspective. From a size perspective, it feels pretty similar. If we want to look at commuter rail agencies that operate service similar to ours, then Fort Worth and Nashville are closest to us in the neighborhood and could be considered. And then you see the note about the trains per day operated by the Nashville service. And then the rest of those agencies that you see there are operating a multimodal portfolio in some small urban or suburban or small to mid-sized city context that feels pretty similar to what's happening here in Denton County and our member cities. Any questions or comments on that?
I think those top four, well, the two that you're proposing to below feel good. I mean, as close as you can. I don't think you're going to find anything as close. I mean, we're unique. It's hard to find something that's similar to us. Exactly similar, exactly like us. So,
Yeah, I think I like this for kind of giving us the four corners of what's out there. By the same token, I'm always hesitant to go, well, this is what's being done. That's the benchmark. This is what we're driving to. So I like it for context, but we are, as you can tell, unique, which is what this data is saying, as we should be. So how does it work for us? That might be a good leading indicator, but I would never go, well, they're doing this, so we got to do this. Does that make sense?
Agree completely. We are our own agency. We are our own culture. We are our own people. I think every one of our member cities would say the same thing. And so the intent of this exercise, like you said, is to paint the four corners of kind of the ballpark that we're playing in.
Yeah, I think my takeaway is obviously there's no agency that's apples to apples, doing everything that we're doing on the same scale that we're doing it. But this gives us some new ways to think about what we could be doing. And what is happening out there and what the possibilities might be, not necessarily what we should be doing, but what the options are.
That's my opinion as well. I mean, we're not going to find anything exactly, but APTA, the time I've been on the group, that has been part of their goal to try and look at different agencies so that, as you said, we can learn from, but we have to be able to do something. Right, to say we're the only one out there, there's no comparisons. I think doesn't give us any ways to address the future. APTA's worked really hard to try and for us and these other communities, say, look, here's some things that can be done. Obviously, after COVID, lots of things changed. But it helps me look at Fort Worth and Nashville and Greensboro. And what are some of the similarities? They have universities, some of the top ones. So we have to look, we don't wash everything out because that's what that with, you know, a trained eye. These are some of the things that are similar. And I think that's important. I think it is important for us to have, and look at some of these different things.
So following the identification of these, what we call peer agencies, we participated in an APTA study last year, provided data about our staff, our compensation, all those, our organizational structure, position titles, all that sort of stuff, that allowed us to get access to an APTA compensation and organizational report that was published late last year. So that's the source of data for this slide. And so these are those peer agencies, and then identifying what was their total ridership, what was their total operating budget, total number of employees, total number of executive employees, and then the types of services that they provide: bus, demand response, rail, and then other, in places like a ferry or an automated guideway, that sort of thing. Again, just for context, to give the board ideas and thoughts as they're making decisions, but helpful data points nonetheless, and also plays into the next agenda item, which is regarding a proposed organizational structure change and a budget amendment for the DCTA and TMC organizations. So any questions on that?
No, I mean, it looked good. The Indianapolis Public Transportation Corporation seems like a little bit of an outlier, just looking at its budget seems higher, but the other ones seem okay. Seem like they're moving. I'm just looking at the budget numbers. So I think at the end, you're gonna come back to this as you refine this and say, this is what I'm gonna ultimately, is that gonna be your next step?
Right, so in terms of next steps in this process, we need to continue efforts to scope a long-range service plan. This helps us to inform an approach to a long-range service plan. And as part of that process, over the course of the coming months and year or so, we as members of our staff ought to make visits to some of these agencies and talk to our counterparts at these agencies to understand how they do their business and what they do, so that we can find things that are helpful to us. They don't dictate what we do, or they don't issue any mandates for us or anything like that, but just to help us understand what else is happening in the industry, very specific to our unique position in it.
Paul, I'd love to get the data on the budget and employee count from Knoxville and Greensboro.
Yeah,
If we could reach out to them, because I'm assuming they didn't
did
respond
not.
to the APTA.
Right, they did not participate in this study.
So
So
for me, it's a really simple dashboard to look at: number of rides, budget, employees, and kind of get how are we performing again, that's a really high level metric,
right.
but I think it's an important one. And so with those two being right there with us on the ridership number, until we blow them away and get up there in the Trinity Metro number. Yeah.
And we're on our way.
Well, I mean, it's a great start. I think I appreciate all the work you and staff have done on this. This at least starts getting us to, these are who we should be at least looking at carefully and seeing how we stack up against them. Right, it's great. Thank you.
I just had a quick comment. When the biggest thing that jumps out to me about this, I really appreciate this analysis. The biggest thing that jumps out to me is really that DART is not on this list that we would consider actually a peer agency, which is something that I've kind of felt like, they're very different than DCTA is, but they're also the closest to us. So it's very convenient comparison. So I appreciate the thought that went into this. And I think this just supports this inkling that I've had that we really shouldn't be comparing ourselves to DART. I think we're going the right direction. I'm really excited.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have another comment.
I'm a trend person. And were there any glaring trends that you saw, for instance, like between the third million and the fifth million type person, or did they go from more train, less bus, or vice versa, or?
So this analysis didn't really give us the ability to see how these agencies were changing over time. It's very time intensive, and this is an in-house effort, so we didn't get to look at these things over the course of a number of periods. But I think this was a really impactful evaluation for me, just looking at, I mean, DCTA finished last year number 21 in the country for demand response. So, and we got to tell that story in Austin. Is it imperfect? Yes. Are there things to improve? Yes. But we have a lot to be proud of as an agency because we're out punching our weight class in this effort. And getting into 1 million rides in 18 months is a significant feat. So that's one of them. And then to identify that generally that sort of demand response indicates that there's opportunity for a larger fixed route bus number as well. It gives us, I think, something to think about. And then the other part is too, again, when you look at the commuter rail ridership, there's a very quick jump when you get north of Trinity Metro. You're into some big major metropolitan areas with densities and things that we would not be seeing anytime in our lifetime. So this tells us, I think, to Ms. Green's point, how we're not the same as DART, even though we're right next to it. Make sense? Okay, well, that concludes my briefing on this item, Mr. Chairman, and I'm happy to stay up here for the next minute as well.
Okay. Thank you. So item number 2 is consider a resolution to approve a budget amendment to modify Denton County Transportation Authority and North Texas Mobility Corporation staff organization structure. This is also Paul Christian's side.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So at the end of this item, we will recommend that the board approve a budget amendment as requested, a budget amendment that will return money to the budget overall for the DCTA and NTNC organizations. And this is a picture of our current organizational structure. And what you see here is that we're operating with 32 active positions. Not all of these positions are filled. There are some vacancies, but these are the overall positions that are in play right now. And so what's being proposed is to eliminate the 8 positions that you see on the bottom right-hand side. What we've learned over the course of the last 18 months is that there's opportunities for this organization to operate more efficiently in a structure like the one that you see actively. And so that's the reason for the recommendations. It says it in the board item. I think it stands repeating here. Any positions that we're talking about eliminating are currently vacant. There is no one's job will be impacted by this budget item, except to the extent that we have the opportunity to make the organization more efficient moving forward. And then on the NTMC side, what we've had in the past, if you recall, was an operating contract from Hendrickson Transportation Group and 105 positions, not including those 4 positions that came from HTG. What we're proposing is the elimination of 10 positions that more accurately aligns with the operation that we have on the street today. One of the things that's come up in our conversations with NTMC is Mr. Bell and I have addressed that team is that as we start talking about additional service on the fixed route and all those sorts of things, those recommendations come with resources. And so as people might be seeing or hearing this briefing, just know that this is where we are today. And then any decisions that are made in the future about how service changes reflects another allocation of resources. So what you see there are the move from 105 positions to 95 positions. And the HTG contract has already gone away. And in place of that, we've hired a new general manager who's already doing great things at NTMC. So here is the proposed DCTA organizational structure moving forward. And what you see here is 4 new positions proposed in order to allow DCTA to achieve capabilities that it doesn't currently have. I'll start on the left-hand side of the slide, the first being the Director of Transportation position. So Mr. Bell is the Chief Operating Officer. His span of control includes all of the NTMC employees, 95 of those, plus Rio Grande Pacific contract employees, about 45 of those, and then the Go Zone drivers who are on the road at any given day, 6 of those employees. Ultimately, we know that we need to evolve in our rail maintenance contract and our partnership with DART for regional rail operations and maintenance. We know we need to evolve in our VIA contract. We know that we need to, and then like we're already doing, thinking differently about our fixed route contract. And ultimately, his ability to focus on those sorts of things is going to require a number 2 in the operating department who can really be over the day-to-day so that Mr. Bell can be thinking about that continuous improvement. Also, continuous improvement in our customer service organization as it evolves as well. And so that Director of Transportation role exists for that. Right there in the middle of the chart, what you see is a proposed position for, it says EVP of Planning and Development. I'd say it's the Vice President or Executive Vice President. We really haven't decided on that yet. But an overall leader for the future planning and development of the organization, because what I can say is Mr. Palermo, who is going to be up here to give a briefing on the intermediate service plan, has been doing a tremendous job as he and I have been shoulder to shoulder over the course of the last year, moving forward on things like the JROF, this COA, the intermediate service plan. But the opportunity for a person to have a larger view of all the different moving pieces and plans that are required to move DCTA forward would be beneficial. And then the other piece in that organization is a manager of data management and analytics. All the things that we're doing now are data driven. I don't think anybody would argue that point. We are making data driven decisions, and there is no limit to the amount of ways that you can cut all the data that's coming into our organization to figure out how to make the right decisions. And so having a full-time person assigned to that sort of work and maintaining the data infrastructure that needs to be developed now that we've installed the Swiftly platform on our buses and are generating automatic passenger counter data and those sorts of things would be really important. And then the last position that you see there is a leader for the customer service organization. And we've talked about this in previous board meetings, that we need to evolve our customer service function from one that is divided between a VIA contracted customer service function and an in-house NTMC customer service function to one singular DCTA customer service function. And in order to do that, we need a leader for that effort. And so that is the purpose of that resource. Any questions there? Questions? Okay. On the NTMC side, we're not proposing any new positions, and what you see here is a flow chart of the organization as Mr. Bell and Mr. Deshay, our new general manager, have come together and said these are the way that the pieces can lay out in order to operate as efficiently as possible. One of the other things that we've done that I think is really important is the general manager at NTMC has an annual review process that looks very similar to the process that this board has established for its CEO. And just in our last NTMC board meeting, the board of directors at NTMC initiated a set of goals and objectives for Mr. Deshay this year. And so that process is well underway. So this is a snapshot of the budget amendment that you see that you have in front of you. Overall, what is happening is a net budget impact savings of just over $1 million generated from the HTG contract elimination, position savings on the DCTA side, position savings on the NTMC side. We've made some adjustments to staffing over the course of the last few months, specifically things like hiring a new general manager and those sorts of things that gets us to that point, adding some money into the budget, and then the 4 new DCTA positions that you see there generate that net budget impact of about $1.1 million.
Paul,
Yes, sir.
the net new positions, that 471 number,
Mhm.
is that for the remainder of the fiscal year, or is that for a full fiscal year?
That's for the remainder of this fiscal year.
Wow. Okay.
So I'm clear. You say net 4, but really I had that you had reduced 8 and then you added back 4.
We reduced 18 and added back.
Right, we reduced 8 at DCTA, 10 at
Yeah, mine.
CTM, so it's 18 total.
I shouldn't have said net 4. I should have just said new 4.
And yeah, so it's not for the public, we're not adding 4 positions, we're actually reducing 14.
Correct.
We reduced 18 and we're just adding 4 with the different titles.
Correct.
Different places. Okay, so we're still 14, reducing 14 total staff and the agency still will run as efficiently, if not better.
Correct. Those positions are vacant today.
That's a fully loaded salary cost there,
That's
right?
salary and benefits.
Yeah, salary and benefits. So I mean, these are with salary and benefits looking to be almost 200K positions, right?
No, not quite.
I mean, if that's 471 for 5 to 6 months,
Right.
then I've got to double that for 4 positions.
The 4 positions, if you kind of look at those on the org chart, they are senior level positions and they do include an estimate for the component of benefits that would be associated with them as well. And so when we ran the calculations to kind of figure out how much additional would be added back to the budget, that's how we come out with the 471.
I mean, as long as you guys have done the math and all that, those are relatively large salary and benefit packages that are for those positions. And I get that they're at the top, as long as they're in line with everything else and not discombobulating the rest of the team.
So we've studied that.
Thank you.
I don't have any questions, but I just want to commend you and the rest of staff for the planning that went into this. You know, one of the things that this board said when we hired you on to be the permanent CEO is that we know that there are organizational issues and there are staffing issues and we need you to fix them. Sometimes that might include filling vacancies. Sometimes it might involve reorganizing the entire organization. So thank you so much for bringing this to us. I move approval.
Second. And again, I want to share what I believe the entire board supports, and that's thank you for doing what we've asked you to do. And that includes all of staff.
Well, and I would say that as this is the result of the leadership team of this agency coming together and saying, let's look at what makes sense. Let's look at what's needed. Every one of them saying, I'm going to be open-handed with the positions that are in my organization because we're trusting that when we come and say there's a need, that there will be a need. And so that's what that staff budget look ahead item talks about, is that, you know, this locks in, I think, the leadership structure of the organization. And as we go into the FY24 process, we'll talk about positions that are needed at the lower levels of the organization in order to ensure capacity and eliminate risk by making sure that core functions can continue, even if an individual or two decides to leave the organization, as we've navigated that over the course of the last 18 months.
Well, we have a motion by Swire, a second, Secretary Costas. Discussion, any other further discussion? I think I should just like to say that we're still net saving over $1 million. So. With that, I will take the vote. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Item number 3 is discuss legislative updates, and we have our Senior Director, Brittany Farr, who will take the lead on this particular item.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair, ladies and gentlemen of the board. Brittany Farr, Senior Director of Engagement Administration. I'm just here today to introduce our Rockstar State Legislative Consulting Team, who's going to provide us with an overview of the happenings of the 88th legislative session, which ends in about 4 weeks, 12 hours, 3 minutes and 50, so not that anyone's counting. Provide an overview of the visit that we made when we made our trip for DCTA Capitol Day back in March, and then a look ahead for the interim session. So with that, I'm going to introduce Brandy Bird with Bird Advocacy, and then I believe we have Mr. Drew Campbell on the Zoom. There he is. I see him there. So Brandy, go ahead and take it away.
Good to see you all. And Drew, I'm going to let you open it up and then you just kick it back to me when you're ready.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board, staff. Appreciate very much the opportunity to be here with you today. I would have been there in person, but the House Transportation Committee met till about 10:30 last night. And of course, at this time of the session, when your bills being heard now, it pretty much isn't going anywhere. Anything that was left pending is not going to have time to make it through the process. But let me give you real quickly kind of a bird's eye view of what's happening. So far this session, the House has introduced 5,410 bills. The Senate has introduced 2,617. Each body, the House has gotten 200 bills that have actually made it from committee through the House, and it's now on its way over to the Senate. The Senate is up over 400. So you can see of the nearly 9,000 bills that have been introduced, only about 600 of them have any chance really of making it through the process. To give you an idea also about how bills move through the process, Ways and Means Committee in the House has 432 pending bills. State Affairs has 611. That means that fully 20% of all the bills introduced are still left without a hearing so far. And to give you an idea, when you think about hundreds and hundreds of bills that are left, currently there's 1,000 bills that are sitting in calendars awaiting to be placed on the calendar of the House. A calendar day that has 70 bills on it, when you think about 10 minutes per bill, you're looking at over 10 hours. So the likelihood of most of these bills ever making it through the process is very, very slim. At this point in the process, basically what we're looking at are 4 issues that are affecting the whole process. That would be the budget. And in that circumstance, the Senate has proposed a $308 billion budget, the House a $303 billion budget. And they've already begun the negotiations to try to come to some kind of an agreement on what that final budget's going to look like. Then, of course, there's the issue of the grid. There's been 9 bills that have come out of the Senate that will affect the operation of the grid. There's about 4 bills in the House. Those things will be worked out again as we work our way through the end of the process. And I'm sure most of you have heard through the media that there's still a lot of conversation about vouchers, and there's a lot of conversation about what we call here the culture wars. I think that both of those issues have fallen way down the list. The voucher situation is interesting in that the House added an anti-voucher amendment to their budget proposal. Upwards of 85 members voted for it. So it doesn't look like one of the sticking points that's going to cause anything to happen. The good news for transportation is that we're seeing a record amount of money being appropriated for transportation. We're seeing a lot of interest in expanding the definition of transportation and having monies put forward to make some of those investments. Just yesterday, interestingly enough, the Senate bill was passed out of the House, which will create a new electric vehicle fee, which would be $400 upon the new purchase of an electric vehicle, $200 per year after that. That bill actually will be on the governor's desk within the next 10 days. But a couple of the last few things that I think that'll be interesting to watch as we work our way through the end of the session is we'll have the final revised estimate of the revenue come from the controller probably by the May 10th. And speculation is that they will have yet another $2 to $7 billion in surplus revenues, which could potentially push us up above $52 billion in surplus. Now, I know there's a lot of conversation about special session. Is there going to be a special session? Well, the only way there will be a special session is if the governor calls it. He has the authority and is the only one who can call a special. Now, what could the lieutenant governor do to cause one? Is that would be not to pass the budget. And there's some conversation about whether or not he would do that or not. The speculation today is that very likely we will finish the year with a budget and be able to go home on time. It's hard to imagine that you can't create a budget and agree to one when you have a $52 billion surplus. Normally, when you have budget problems, it's because of tax bills, and the tax bills can't be agreed to. But with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions. And if I don't know the answers, I'm sure Byron and Brandy there would be able to come up with an answer.
Thank you, Drew. Is there any questions from Drew or Brandy?
I was just gonna say, so far, Drew has given you a general overview. I'm gonna go into the DCTA specific stuff, but happy to take questions
Right.
for Drew before we move on.
Questions for Drew on what he just went over? Very good. Okay.
Thank you. So I was just gonna highlight the DCTA Legislative Day. So that took place in March 20th, and many of you came down to Austin that Legislative Day. There's actually a handout at your place. If you haven't seen it, it was the legislative handout that Brittany and her team developed, and it was really fantastic. We got a lot of compliments on that down in Austin. It has the legislative agenda on one side and then some DCTA key statistics on the other side. And so Paul and the board members that attended did a really great job of just outlining DCTA's successes. Then we met with every single member in person of the legislative delegation, and they're all listed here. But that's the entire DCTA legislative delegation. And for those of you who have been to Austin for meetings before, you know that many times you're really meeting with staff because the members are pretty busy during the session. And so our team worked really hard to make sure that we met with the members themselves, every single one of the delegation. And they were all very complimentary of DCTA. Our peers, maybe not so much. They're not exactly in the same position that we are. So I think that that really says a lot for DCTA and the successes that the staff and the board have been able to accomplish. And we really, this legislative session did not have a big ask. Our legislative agenda was really focused on defense and expanding the options for state funding for public transportation this session. And so what we really did with these legislative visits is just set the foundation for DCTA's success. If issues were to come up this session where we needed to play defense, and then really set the stage and the foundation for future sessions when we may have a larger ask and move that agenda forward. So they were all very successful. We got a lot of great feedback. All of the board members who attended can certainly speak to that. But getting into specific legislation that affects DCTA. So Drew covered the budget. I think the biggest issue with that is in prior sessions, we've seen real negative amendments to the budget, especially on the House side related to public transportation. And so we scoured 300 pages of amendments to the budget just to make sure that there weren't any that would negatively impact public transportation or DCTA specifically. And so there were not this session, which I think is a real positive. It definitely shows a changing of mindsets related to public transportation in Austin. But that was really the key factor for us related to the budget. And then there's two bills. There's no bills that directly negatively impact DCTA. So that is also a real positive. Again, not the case with some of the other transit agencies around the state. So it shows the relationships and the perception of DCTA with our legislative delegation. But there are two bills that have some minor negative impact. The first is the prohibition on taxpayer funded lobbying. So restricting your agency's ability to have representation in Austin. That bill is SB 175. It has passed the Senate. It has been referred to House committee, but it has not received a hearing. It's been there for several weeks. The House companion also has not received a hearing in House State Affairs. So that should give you some indication we feel very comfortable that that bill will not pass at this point in the session. And then the other bill is House Bill 5140. And Drew talked about all the numbers of the number of bills that are filed and where they are in the process, the backlog in House calendars. There's lots of bills that have negative impacts that never go anywhere, and this is a perfect example of them. House Bill 5140 by Representative Kane. This bill would conflict with federal law, so it would have prohibited the use of race or ethnicity in government contracting. So it would have had a direct conflict with your federal DBE program, and that would certainly put DCTA in a bad position. But the bill never even received a hearing in the House committee. So not something that we're concerned about, but did want to let you know that those are the two bills that could have some negative impact, but are not going anywhere in the process at this point. And then the really good news, there were 4 bills filed that would expand state funding for public transportation. That was #1 issue on our legislative agenda this session. And Drew touched on it a little bit, but just the fact that there are this many members who understand that transportation cannot just be highways and must be expanded, and that we're going to need some state funding for public transportation at some point at the state level is a huge positive. HJR 77 by Representative Wally, who is out of Houston. That bill did receive a hearing last week in the House Transportation Committee. The House Transportation Committee Chair, Terry Canales, is very supportive. He's working on another constitutional amendment to expand state funding for other modes that are not just highways. So there's a lot of real positive momentum there. And your lobby team working with your staff, we did register in support and discussed the bill with the members of the committee and really expressed our support for that legislation. So I think it sets a good stage and foundation for future sessions just to build on that momentum. And then there's 2 bills that directly impact our peer transit agencies. So just to give you a feel for how things are going at the state level for other agencies, other public transportation agencies around the state, some of our peers. There's a bill on the House and Senate side that would impact DART. And it basically requires in the annual financial audit that DART would segregate their expenditures per member city. So this is something that the member cities are pursuing. It's coming from the city of Plano, but it's also supported by Irving and some of their other member cities. The bill did receive a hearing both on the House and Senate side. It was not terribly complimentary, but I will say that neither bill has been voted out of committee. So that's a real positive. They're working on some compromise language, and hopefully that will get worked out at the local level and not need to continue to move forward at the state level. And then the Austin Transit Partnership, if you're not familiar with this organization, it's an LGC that was created by Capital Metro and the city to move the Project Connect project forward. This is the $7 to $12 billion project. It's the massive public transportation expansion project in Austin. They have faced some difficulty from the opposition. The voters approved the funding mechanism for Project Connect several years ago, but the opposition has come to the legislature and is working on legislation that would force another vote in order for that agency to issue debt. So it just helps you to understand, I think, the larger context of what some of the legislation is that's impacting our fellow transit agencies in Texas. And that bill has been voted out of committee on the House side, and it's gone to the House local and consent calendar. So I do expect that it will pass the House, and then we'll see where it falls on the Senate side. And then Drew talked about this quite a lot, but I'll just emphasize it a little bit. The session, we've got 4 weeks to go, as Brittany said. We're all counting down the days and hours and minutes at this point. Really, if a bill is not out already out of committee in the first House, it's dead. That's not the official deadlines, but from a practical standpoint, it is. And Drew described there are 500 bills and calendars right now and another 800 that have been voted out of committee and are on their way to calendars. And they're only going to get to about 500 before the deadline hits on the House side. So that just gives you a feel for some of the pieces of legislation that we've talked about. If it's not already out of the first house, it's not going to succeed this legislative session. And then just some of the other key dates, May 12th is the last day for all House bills on the calendar. That's the official deadline, but it's really several weeks before that from a practical standpoint. And then, of course, signing die is Monday, May 29th, and we're counting down. And then we've been discussing with Paul and Brittany, and your staff has done a good job of already thinking to the future and what does the interim look like? And so once the session concludes, assuming there's no special sessions, we're certainly cheering on no special sessions at this point. We'll be debriefing with your staff to just really have a holistic view of what took place this session that affected DCTA, and then also other transit agencies in Texas, and then start talking about what are our goals for next session. The interim is really where you do all the work in relationship building and having those conversations about what we want to pursue next session, getting that language drafted and really working towards building a coalition of groups that would support that as well. So that's what we'll be focused on during the session. The two Senate, the House and Senate Transportation Committee chairs are definitely on our agenda. And we've had a long conversation with your staff about that, going out to their districts and meeting with them and really pushing the agenda of state funding for transportation. That's really where we intend to be focused. That's our efforts so far this legislative session. And happy to take any questions from the board or staff.
Thank you. Brandy, how does that work, meeting with the chairs? Because, you know, in 2 years, usually the speaker and the lieutenant governor select new chairs. So
Yes.
you can create a relationship with House Representative Canales or Senator Nichols, and if they're not there, how does that work?
No, you're right. I mean, there's always that risk, but generally speaking, if they're an established chair and they've done a good job, then you would expect those committee chairs to return, especially in transportation. Some of the other committees maybe fluctuate a little bit more, but transportation is one of those issues that's complicated, takes a long time to learn. And so there's typically not a lot of turnover in those committee chairmanships, unless those members are not going to return. If they're going to retire, then that's a different situation. But we certainly anticipate that both of the committee chairs in the House and Senate will return. And so our goal is to work with both of them. Representative Canales is more open about state funding for transportation. Senator Nichols is from the rural area. And so we've got a little work to do with them. And so that's why we want to really go sit down with them in their districts, which is very meaningful to them when you're willing to take the time to do that and start to have this conversation about what that could look like. What funding sources are they open to considering for state funding for transportation in the future?
Other questions? Right.
31 days, 12 hours, 41 minutes, and 35 seconds, just so you know.
Thank you, TJ. I appreciate you calculating that.
Oh, there's a website.
Oh, excellent. Okay, good to know.
So the bills that were beneficial to transit, a couple slides back. If I heard your parsing of the language properly, you don't expect any of those to actually get through. It's just that's positive signaling for next session.
Yes, so one of the bills has received a hearing in the House. The other ones have been filed but have not received a hearing. So they haven't made it very far in the process, but the fact that there's 4 different members that were willing to file a bill to do that shows a lot of momentum. And so we think that's a real positive step. You know, typically there's groups around the state that they're very protective of highway funding. And so that is, you know, definitely stepping out there to file a bill on that topic. So we think that's real positive.
Would speaking to them during the interim as well, those that filed, would that be important in the conversation?
Yes, absolutely. And I should say the meetings with the committee chairman are just a first step. You know, we've got 18 months to work on this over the interim. And so that's where we'll start, is with the chairs. But to Cesar, to your point, there are a number of members on the House and committee side that, because of seniority, they're automatic appointments to House and Senate transportation. And so we know who those members are, and we'll be systematically working through that leadership, and then also TJ working on the members that already see this as something that's important.
Thank you.
It'll be an ongoing effort over that 18 months, and we'll be working with your staff to develop that strategy.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I just want to say, I think we set it up well with the legislators that we did meet, that we didn't have necessarily an ask. But I think we teed it up that we will be coming back. And the importance of it. And I think most of them understood. Kind of, especially knowing what DCTA is doing. That we can't continue to go on without state funding.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And you're right, Diane. That's the position that you want to be in. If you're going to meet with them and trying to build a relationship, when you do have an ask, it's too late. You really want to be building that relationship first and then coming back later with an ask. And so that's certainly what we're working towards.
All right, thank you. And I want to, again, thank you all for setting up the DCTA days in Austin. I think that was a great opportunity to meet our representatives. And I appreciate the work that Randy, you and Drew and Brittany and all the rest of his team did on it. And so I think that was well worth the time we spent going out there. So thank you.
Absolutely. And
Anything
your staff has been a pleasure to work with. So
Thank you.
we've enjoyed it.
Okay.
you.
It is now 11:21. We're going to take a short recess till about 11:45 for a lunch break. So we are adjourned until then. Ready? Everybody's ready to go? Okay. It is 11:49 a.m. and I'm reconvening the April 27th for the directors meeting. We are now moving to item number 4, discuss intermediate service plans update. Mr. Trela.
Good morning, Board of Directors. Javier Trilla, AVP of Innovation and IT here at the agency. Today, I'll be kicking off a discussion item regarding the work performed since our last briefing during the January board meeting towards the progress that we have on the intermediate service. When we last left off, I presented a general outline of what and why and how of the intermediate service plan. So this is a discussion item only, and while there is no board action required, we are looking for feedback from the board on this item. Quick recap, a reminder of the intermediate service plan goal as stated is to develop data-driven alternatives that attempt to balance GO zone coverage and fixed route service to increase ridership and improve efficiency, service, and cost outcomes. So while this graphic is pretty linear about the process, we're kind of probably somewhere between step 2 and 3 at this point. We've made significant progress over the last several months, and today I'll be passing this over to real service planners, and you'll be hearing from Tim Palermo, Manager of Planning and Data Analytics, along with our team from AECOM, Andrew Iddigson, and Justin Zilla, who will be providing some updates as well. Before I leave here, I can't leave without providing this graph that you've seen probably about 1 million times over the past 18 months, but here we are. I think the key thing that I can call out from the GO zone performance of FY23 year to date is stability and steady state. You can see that the ridership and demand graph for the most part is unchanged. We have realized some service efficiency over the course of the past several months. So we have seen some improvements in service quality in the sense of wait times, where we're down from about 22, 21 minutes over the first half of the year so far, down to 18 and 19 minutes. And I think the best call out here is seat availability has improved as well, from 15% dropping down to 9%, and then kind of steady state 8%. These efficiencies have come with no increase in service hours. So the amount of hours that we're putting out on the street is unchanged. So no increase in cost or change whatsoever. The demand drops that we see in January and December, of course, are holiday, but otherwise you can see the demand is pretty much stabilized in that 115,000 to 120,000 requests per month, with actualized completed rides somewhere between 70,000 and 75,000 rides per month. The only real change that we've seen over the past 6 months is right smack in the middle between December and January, where we saw the fare and service change. Ultimately, the impacts of that, now that we have some real data behind it, trip lengths haven't changed all that much, but some of the distribution may have changed, which is the result of some of the efficiencies that we've seen overall. But truly, it doesn't seem like the fare changes had much impact on the demand of the service overall. So folks are still riding it, folks are still loving it, and here we are. And from that, I will pass the presentation over to Tim Palermo. And I think I went back once.
Yeah.
Nope. There you go. Next time.
There we go. Hi, good afternoon, board members. The intermediate service plan is intended to build upon the current aggressive inertia associated with the increased connect frequencies, which yielded a ridership increase of over 35% when compared to fiscal year 22. On the UNT side, the 2 routes, the Colorado Express and Discovery Park, that are being under consideration for improvement in the intermediate service plan are over 60% above fiscal year 22 levels. All UNT routes are on pace for a ridership above fiscal year 22. So this is an opportunity associated with these increased riderships and how we can leverage that, the latent demand that we uncovered when we increase frequencies. We want to see how deep that might be. Oops, yep. In-house GO zone data mining was the genesis of the intermediate service plan. Currently, about 1/4 of all Denton GO zone trips begin and end within a 1/4 mile of a bus stop on the 5 routes that are most productive and under consideration as part of this plan. These GO zone trips tend to be concentrated in the outer and longer trip lengths, on the outside of the Denton GO Zone service area. The 3 connect routes, the same, almost 9% of the GO Zone origin destination pairs begin and end within a quarter mile of existing routes. So we have some duplication. Recognizing this duplication, we established 2 initial interventions in November. The first was multimodal trip proposals. GO Zone customers receive a alternate trip proposal when they try to book a ride, or when they do book a ride within a quarter mile of a connect stop. Since January, we've had over 250,000 trip proposals offered, and 3% of them have clicked through. It's hard to tell who accepts that proposal because they aren't logged as a GO Zone trip, and they're difficult to log as a connect trip. Guiding principles of the intermediate service plan. The first is productivity. Get service in the right place, the right service, and at the right time. The second is integration. Having the maximizing our investment in the A-train system, using GO Zone where it's most appropriate to increase coverage. The other one is efficiency. Minimize duplication of services. Get people in the right seat at the right price. And finally, is optimal frequencies. Having service at a level and frequency that is attractive and competitive against driving and other modes. There's 2 different components of frequencies, which we'll go into later. The three criteria that we're using to develop and screen all alternatives are travel time, the time it takes to get from one place to another, which includes in vehicle time, the span of service, when transit service begins and ends according to the schedule, and the frequency of service. To the first item, travel time. There's many components of travel time. Increasing frequency of transit does not increase the amount of time spent on transit. The bus still, the vehicle still travels at the same speed. The good news is when you increase frequency, it increases the capture area of fixed route transit because people realize they will spend less time waiting for the bus and will likely convert that extra time in their trip planning budget, time budget, into accessing transit. These are some general representations of the end-to-end journey start point, end start point components of fixed routes. These are major network nodes within the Denton service area. And we calculated how we're going, the amount of the transfer required, the amount of time to get between each of these destinations on this trip table. Given very 20-minute frequencies. Let's talk a little bit about the frequency. There's 2 components of frequency. That's the amount of time waiting or how often the bus comes by. And the other component of frequency is the distribution of frequency, whether or not that frequency is going to be consistent throughout the day or vary to correspond with peak periods of peak demand. One item for board consideration is we started this with a 5-route network with the 3 Connect networks and the 2 UNT, Colorado Express and Discovery Park. We're leaning towards a 3-route network as a phased program, and then having an incremental data-driven feedback to see how we might improve and optimize the UNT network. And the main reason of that is the high cost of operating UNT service year-round, as well as the practicality of having UNT service changes coincide with the beginning of the academic. These are the routes under consideration. The distribution.
They all, some of them start at 8 o'clock, others start at 7. The some of the UNT service frequency increases at the end of the day, as well as varying frequencies on the Connect 6. This is the current schedule. Connect 6 and 7 begin at 8 o'clock, whereas the other routes begin at 7 o'clock, and as well as the frequency periods vary. So today we're looking for input, whether or not we want to phase at 3 and 5 routes, and what frequencies we'd like to have, and not just the frequency, but how that if that frequency should be consistent throughout the day.
Tim, if I could pause, if you go back for just a second. So one of the things that emerges, we're going through this process, is that there's any number of alternatives that could be put together on how you stage, how many, which bus routes, what time do they start, which time do they end, all that sort of thing. And so what we lay out here is 3 or 5 route network. Like Tim said, it may be wise to begin looking at the 3 route network. Another reason to do that, besides the one that he mentioned, is we're not sure what the uptake is going to be from these people who are using GoZone to the fixed route. And so lots of costs to cause UNT routes to go all year round. It might be wise to see what happens when you cause people to divert to the fixed route on the Connect network, which would be a smaller incremental cost, so that we can see how our customers are going to behave. And then with regard to start and end times, ideally, we're looking for a network that's easy for the rider, back to one of our key messages, hence the reason why common starts and end times make sense. And then the idea that the frequency ought to line up across all of our modes, where, and we'll get into this in a second, but 10, 20, 30 minute, 10, 20, 15-minute frequency lines up differently with a 30-minute A train frequency, as you think about how all those pieces fit together. And then this is one of the, I think, one of the more impactful things that we came up with through the course of this process. And so I'll stop there and kick it back over.
All right, sure. Frequency and span of service, the first thing we looked at was aligning with our most significant transit investment in our flagship service, that being that of the A train, which as you can see, these are the boardings for the A train. We have 6 and 7 starting at 8 o'clock, and you can see how that's impacted boardings. A lot of it's being held off to 8, where it could be distributed across more trains, but more importantly, it could attract more riders to the A train because there'll be an earlier bus to that service on the 6 and 7. We looked at peak periods, whether or not there's a classic 2-hump shape of AM and peak hour, rush hour ridership. And there's not much, which tells us the trip purpose on a lot of our Connect service is something other than journey to work. It's getting places, it's shopping, it's taking care of your household, it's going to school, important things like that. Another thing we evaluated. So the first
Tim, I'm sorry, if we go back, one thing I want to call out here. Route 3 serving the shelter out in the loop. While it's not a peak period per se, there is a pretty well-defined hour in which we see a lot of traffic on the bus going to and from, which lines up with what we've heard from that facility, that people have a need to get to and from work at the beginnings of the ends of the day. So it's positive to see that they respond there. And then the other takeaway that I get from this slide is ridership curtailing at about just after the 5 o'clock hour on 6 and 7. 6, you can see up there that we're at 20-minute frequency towards the end of the day. And in Route 7, we're running 20-minute frequency all day, but look at how demand on 7 begins to tail off. Now, the caveat here, which is similar to what we were in the COA last year, is we have 3 months of data, and February doesn't count because it's short and there was bad weather. So we need to all recognize what we're dealing. We're kind of working this on the fly, but I do think that there is some good knowledge to be gained out of this data set that we have. Go ahead, Tim.
This is the options for the 3-out alternative. All options 1 and 2 both have a consistent start time at 7 a.m. to coincide with A train departures, as well as to correspond with GoZone frequency. The option 1 has a consistent headway throughout and extended service hours. And option 2 is the same, however, it tapers off in the evening period. And this is the same for the 5 route network. Again, aligning with the A train service, consistent headways versus peak off-peak headways. The other guiding principle is duplication of services. These are origin and destination pairs. The map on the left is within a quarter mile of existing transit stops, and of which there is a total potential market in the 3 route network of 2,700 and in the 5 route network of 7,800 or 24% of all GO Zone trips operating within the time span of bus service. As you can see, the gray bars are GO Zone, distribution of GO Zone trips that would not correspond to the time span of our proposed alternatives. The chart on the right is a buffer that's not around the stops, it's around the actual alignment, which would correspond to what would look like, this is the half mile, improved walkability, as well as smart programming of bus stop funding. For instance, the $1 million we recently were awarded from the RTC. With investments in walkability and bus stop spacing, we could capture potentially a market of almost 25,000 potential trips. The other tool we have to implement this is geofencing. And that would enable limiting GO Zone access in and around current connect stops, but also opportunities for geofencing areas where there's heavy GO Zone activity that are served by a fixed route. For instance, Discovery Park, which would add ridership on the 6 and free up GO Zone for more outlying areas and areas of higher demand.
Yeah, can I insert something there as well? So another reason to tend towards a 3 route alternative or network at this stage is one of those routes that we considered was Discovery Park. Well, if you want a higher frequency network and Discovery Park is accessible by Route 6 year round without investing in additional service, then those people could, if not given the ability to take GO Zone to Discovery Park, like they're not able to take GO Zone to the middle of the UNT campus, the investment in frequency on 6 and 7, which already runs year round, would allow those people to access Discovery Park without additional investment on UNT. Now, all of these things need to be evaluated in terms of where are the stops today and are they really able to be used for the types of trips that we're envisioning. But like Tim said, the funding that we've gotten through the COG would allow us to have some flexibility in maybe getting some of those stops improved to facilitate these movements.
Can I ask a question on that slide? So this graded graphic to the right, what do those pink circles represent?
Pink circles represent a quarter mile around a bus stop.
I don't think I've ever seen like a map of geofencing.
There's the current geofence is the gray polygon on the left side map.
So that's, okay, so only the gray on the left side map, and that's, okay.
It's geofenced in a way such that GO Zone trip origins cannot take place there, but you can be dropped off.
But you can be dropped off there. Thank you.
These are the items that we're open for discussion. This is a discussion item, no action required, but we're seeking feedback, especially on the 3 route versus 5 route scenario, phasing, as well as frequency items. And conversion I'm interested in too. Yes.
Thank you. Regarding the 3 versus 5 route approach, I would love in the long term, in the big picture, to see us move toward a model where we're not treating the UNT routes and the connect routes as being completely separate things. Of course, that's more than just about route design, right? There's a lot of communications and marketing that's going to be involved in making sure that we communicate to both members of the UNT community and members of the Denton community who aren't affiliated with UNT that that they can use both services, both types of routes. But I am hearing a concern about the idea of a 5 route scenario. I guess maybe I'm picking up on staff feeling like there are some logistical concerns with including the UNT routes. Can you elaborate on what would be the drawbacks of a 5 route?
The 5 route, there's no drawback. It's we want to build on the inertia we had with Connect on our first phase. What encourages a phasing of UNT and the Connect and having UNT as a potential second phase is it's real expensive to go year round. There's a lot of coordination required, and it needs to correspond at the beginning of the academic year.
So basically, like if we were to support a 3 route approach, we would be saying we only want to make a decision on Connect routes in June. Or what are we talking about? Are we talking about making one decision and then phasing it, or are we talking about making different decisions?
I'll take that. We're looking for a decision sometime in the summer, July, June, could be July. We've got great communication with our partners at UNT, and they've been involved in this process. As soon as we have these discussions with you all, we go and sit down with them and say, here's where we are in the process. One of the things that they expressed was the challenges of trying to implement a service change in the middle of a school year. So as where our calendar runs January to December, and we like to do things on January 1, and January 1, they've got students who have been in for 1 semester and now they're being asked for another adjustment. So that's part of it. The bigger thing in my mind is we've really gotten into this and out of the gate, we started looking at the data going, hey, 5 routes, there's a big opportunity here. But the numbers in the background on what it costs to run these bus routes at these frequencies show us we didn't bring them here because we still want to do some vetting and proofing, and our CFO has to approve all numbers before they come into the forum, but it gets pretty expensive. And what I can't tell you based on 3 months of data and the click-through rate of 3% for a multimodal proposal is whether or not riders are going to take if they're only given the option for fixed route, will they do it? And that's a big gamble because we've got great momentum on our ridership growth. And the last thing we want to do at this stage is make it harder for our customers to use the service. So what I think I owe you in the next board meeting is more of a roadmap of, okay, here's a decision for an intermediate service plan phase 1 that maybe can take place in January on a 3 route network. And then intermediate service plan phase 2 might be, okay, let's talk about these other 2 UNT routes that come into the mix for the following year as we carefully and methodically build this network. As we've had these workshops with our consulting team and me and Tim and Javier and our consultants sitting down looking at all these data and numbers, we ask ourselves the question, who else is doing this? Planning a network based on actual data coming from riders that's, by the way, only 3 months old. And the answer is not a lot of people. And so we want to be really sure that we make recommendations that are going to bear the fruit that we think they will. So hence the need for prudence. Makes sense?
Makes a whole lot of sense.
We're moving towards a data-driven incremental structure of service planning.
Okay, well, then in light of that, I feel like, my concerns about wanting to better integrate the 2 systems can be best addressed if we take our time and plan carefully. So I'm fine with just looking at the 3 Connect routes at this time with an eye toward in the future integrating the system.
And let me make sure I understand when you're saying the 3, you're kind of saying that these 3 routes, 3, 6, and 7, and there's a duplication of service in Colorado Express and Starter Park that can be captured within.
Well, initially, no, what we were saying is the duplication of service between 367 Colorado Express and Discovery Park is with the Go Zone service. But as we start putting these maps together and the data together, and we start talking about Now where it's really easy for somebody to take Route 6 to Route 7 to get to Discovery Park, then it's, well, why would I fund Discovery Park potentially year round if it's a 2-seat transfer to get there from the UNT campus? And therein is another minor point, but if you go back a few slides to the travel time between network modes, a place where we talk about integration of these two services.
That
So
one,
yeah, this one. So the map in, no, next. So the map in the upper right, you see the UNT Union. And then you see the purple lines at the top. That's Hickory and Oak where 7 runs. So it's a third of a mile walk between where the UNT buses come in and the Route 6 and 7 buses come in. And so when we talk about transfers between these two networks, this is not typical what we'd expect to see across the rest of the network. And so is it feasible to think that people are going to make that walking transfer and only use fixed route if they're used to using Go Zone? It's the reason to take it one small step with Connect, and then figure out how do we work with our partners at UNT to make that an easier transfer for people if we're going to bring in the UNT routes into the network. Does that make sense?
Got a few. Okay. So I think, yeah, I have no issues with the gradual integration of UNT as a full network. I think it's a mistake that it's to look at these as a contract and a service. I think we really focus on how do we provide this as a complete service that is adequately funded by UNT. Because of the substantial amount of benefit that they receive from it as well. I think that the less painful way to find out if pulling the lever hurts or helps is that we disable the Go Zone virtual stops within a quarter mile around the fixed routes and see what happens. It'll eliminate the duplication of service first. And I know that might not be a popular response, but for me, I'm very, very hesitant to change timing. And I feel like let's pull one lever at a time. I mean, I'm okay, I guess, with changing the timing to sync up. But I really think you're going to see more ridership impact by eliminating the duplication of service. I said it earlier at the break, never, ever, ever underestimate what people will pay for convenience. They will pay whatever it takes to be convenient. And that duplication, I really believe people are using Go Zone because it is more convenient. As it is. I mean, that's the beauty of the service. By the same token, if you want to put ridership on a bus and be more efficient, it's not necessarily super convenient, but it may entail a quarter mile walk. That drives into my concerns about funding. We're about to, I presume we're going to experience a fall off in federal funds. I know that I've got a $171 million bogey on my rail to get it to a space where we feel it's competitive and integrated regionally. However much of that comes out of our pocket, we don't know. But I can't imagine that it would be insignificant. And so I'm worried about revenue decline. I'm worried about capital costs, and I'm worried about providing more service that we potentially might have to walk back to be able to fund the capital cost. So I don't want to set a bar so high on the service side that suddenly I can't get the train to be the catalytic type of change that we want to be able to create. I mean, my opinion on changing the rail, the A train, is that it's catalytic. It's a game changer because it integrates so tightly with the rest of the transit system. But if it comes back to this board that, hey, we're going to have to take a bus line off. We're going to have to drop back to 30 minutes. When we start having that conversation, that's just a lot of pain and agony that I just don't feel like we would have to go through if I had better numbers. And I get some of this is timing. I mean, we're talking about LAN not having the report to us until September-ish. That's a long time. And I would hope that we could accelerate that, but I know Paul and I have talked about that. So that to me is the bigger macro. I'm not against any of what we're talking about here. It's increasing service, it's providing better, but I'm really, really worried about our fiscal position and where that all lines up. I mean, and another conversation to have in here is as we start looking at this is, you know, could we reduce the KPIs in the Denton zone for Go Zone and free up the revenue there to improve KPIs down in the bottom half? If you're adding more bus service, there maybe need to be a reduction in services as opposed to just a straight $1 to $1. Conversation to be had. There's a triangle there, right? And I don't feel that this conversation quite captures that for me yet. And maybe we're there, maybe we're not. But I love that we're data driven. This slide speaks to me, right? We're data driven on, we need to pick up these, and this density of travel needs to be on a fixed route because it is absolutely more cost effective. I love it. More of that. I don't know if we're gonna get people to walk a half mile, but I love the concept of the quarter mile.
I like to sometimes characterize this map as this is a map of DCTA customers that already have a taste for DCTA transit services.
Yeah. Agreed.
The other thing that's really cool about this map is it speaks to, and in next board meeting, we'll have a conversation about what causes people to walk or what causes people not to walk. But there's data layers for sidewalk inventories and sidewalk quality and all that sort of stuff that fits nicely into the master planning effort that the city of Denton is going to be
Which
undertaking.
ties into our trip program, which
ties into how DCTA ought to be involved in the fabric of the communities that we serve. And so lots of good things there. The point, I think you made a point that I want to make sure that I'm clear on, that we're clear on, is this idea of multimodalism. When we talk about causing people to use fixed route instead of Go Zone, what has been in our mind up to this point has not been geofencing all of the fixed routes, because in my mind, that would just cause a person to walk just outside the geofence and call for a Go Zone, and then we don't get to take any capacity, get to reallocate any capacity. What it is rather is a person can book a ride if they're within a quarter mile of a bus stop and they're going to some place that's not within a quarter mile of a bus stop. So it relies on the technology of the app. Where are you trying to go to and from? And does your requested trip pair correspond with the logic that is, you're trying to go from this bus stop to this bus stop? No, you need to take the bus. So I think that we can look at both as we move forward.
Well, and I think to that end, yeah, maybe just geofencing it all is a really simplistic done, but adjusting KPIs would, I mean, make the efficiency harder, right? It's harder it's that 3% is like they're doing it because it's faster, but that's only 3% that's doing it. So make it spread the product mix further apart as far as timing goes and see what that drives. Maybe the splitting the baby kind of conversation. I'd love to see maybe a larger map offline of the existing geofence in Denton. With virtual, and specifically where it shows which virtual stops are disabled around the campus. Just to get a feel for that.
Okay.
You can't see it on the scale that we typically show. And then maybe some additional data on this. When we talked about the peak periods, is that data after the current, before and after the current service change, or is it just inclusive?
It's after.
Okay, it's after the service change. And it's board history, and maybe the rest of the board can correct me on this. We cut the timing on the buses at the ends of the day because they weren't lining up, or the utilization of the buses to the trains just wasn't there. This was a while back, I think, but I think we kind of sliced the ends off. Do you?
Yeah.
Ridership wasn't there.
I mean, as far as the service changes that we made January 1st of this year, and then the service changes that we made the previous year, there was not a conversation as part of those decisions about how it lined up with the A train. It was just about ridership at certain hours of the day, and if it was too low, then we.
But there was a point where they all lined up. And the ridership wasn't there, and so we dropped it. I don't know if that has been in the conversation. It may have been pre you, Paul, so. But that may be a reason why everything, at least at the ends of the day, the buses and the train don't line up today. So there was a decision there based on utilization. So I'm a little gray on that one.
So we can come up with a summary of what has been over the course of the last 24 months, what were the service changes and what did they impact? We can paint that picture. The reason for that conversation is really to say, there's a population of people who are getting off the A train at the 7 a.m. hour at the DDTC. And you have 3, 6, and 7 who are leaving from the DDTC, but not until an hour after they get there. So those people have no choice but to use Go Zone. Now, we have some other graphs that talk about, that weren't in this presentation, and talk about how many people are deplatforming at DDTC. We don't have a clear picture on where they're going, but.
Well, and if we figure that ridership is that are deplat in that hour timeframe, we figure that's acceptable amount of ridership to capture. Then, okay, cool, great. I don't have an issue with it. But I'm not clear on whether that does that or not.
Yeah, we've got to do some more digging.
Okay, so those are my concerns. I don't have an issue exploring it, but to approve it, I'm gonna need to know what this looks like in that bigger picture of A train capital funding, before I can be really comfortable with increasing service in the transit side, on the Connect side.
We'll have alternatives for different conversion rates of Go Zone riders and a corresponding operating cost savings with that.
Yeah, that's going to be important to see too. Yeah, I mean, if it's a net positive that we anticipate, then okay, great.
Yeah.
To the budget, I know how much it costs to turn up the frequency.
Right.
And it ain't cheap.
Right. And Sherelle and I and Maurice are already working on the macro view of the budget for next year. So we'll be ready for that.
Yeah, that's why I asked the big questions, because I know we've got a CFO that can handle them. So. But that's the conversation I need to have before I'm completely comfortable with pulling the trigger on increasing frequency.
Okay.
Other discussion?
Well, and I think this is the discussion process, right? I mean,
Yes.
And that this is what's helpful, have these discussions so that staff can know what the board needs to. As far as a phase program, I'm always a phase program person. We've got 3 months history. That's hard because we're all, we're looking at 3 months history is not, it's difficult, but we're also.
But it's super accurate now.
And again, as TJ said, I love the data-driven information, and I thank staff for all y'all are doing to bring this to us. It makes our job a lot easier. But when we've talked about the reroute and the phase, I would go with that.
That's helpful. And then the takeaway from your comments, Mr. Vice Chair, is it's not just about offsetting Go Zone cost and bus service costs. It's what's the bigger nugget on the A train and the overall operating budget.
Yeah.
Okay. That's exactly what we were looking for out of this conversation, is what are the corners that we're trying to paint. So thank you.
I think it'll be. I think a previous item, we authorized 2 positions that are going to be doing this type of work, a director and another manager. And it's going to take probably a little bit of time. So I think we should move slowly and data driven, because he's going to have to hire the people. And then those people have to get to start doing the work. But ultimately, that VP of planning and development, that manager of data manager will be working with Tim, and they're all gonna start this additional horsepower and to run through all these scenarios. I think the vice chair's point about geofencing, how, let's move a lever. I think those are great points. But it struck me that, you don't really know until you try something and then you look at how it works, because you get all unintended consequences. We had a public citizen talked about, the algorithm sometimes makes it such that I move past my bus stop. Sometimes when you adjust this algorithm, it's very complicated. That's all I'm trying to say. It's very complicated. And it's gonna take a little time to run through those numbers. I really truly understand how all this works. So those are my comments. Yeah, I think I have a couple here. Did Kirsten, she had her hand up first.
Sorry, I just wanted to, I wanted to ask Paul if there, so we're talking about, we've got 3 months of data, and that is, I love having the data. But I also understand that even though we're collecting the data and we can see, what the current trends are, there's a human behavior that is sometimes going to lag there. Just, people, maybe they don't know that the Connect services have already, the frequency has increased. And so it just, over time, it just takes, time for that to settle out. So is there in the public transportation industry, is there kind of a benchmark for how long you would expect a service change to really run the course so that, not only our data collection, we have all of that, but also that human behavior has kind of balanced out and we've reached a steady state, I guess I'll call it.
It's a good point. I would measure it in years. And so, I think we've done a good thing as an agency and with this board's direction on slowing our pace of change. Now we're on an annual calendar, which is where we need to be. And we're having this conversation because of the question. We have a limited number of resources and we have a big obligation in the A train and we want to make it better. Got a big obligation in the Go Zone service and we want to make it as good as we can be. And the fixed route seems to be the path forward to move the most people as cost effectively as possible, but we got to figure out how all the numbers work. So your point's well taken. I mean, it could be that, last summer, remember, we didn't know what Go Zone demand was going to do in the summertime. We thought, well, surely it's going to drop off when school is out, and it didn't. And so we don't know today that whether or not more and more people are going to start coming to the fixed route and we're going to see less demand on Go Zone through the summertime. We don't know that. What we do know, and that we should all be really excited about, is that we're pushing 1.5 million riders through 6 months of the fiscal year, which we haven't seen that kind of volume since 2018. And so we've got a really good thing going. We're on the leading edge of fixed route bus planning with this data that we have. And we're doing what we said we were going to do at the beginning of the year, which is looking at this stuff and seeing if we can make some logical conclusions that make sense for our customers and for the board.
Sorry, I realized that I had only given direction on one of the items. So phasing, sounds like there is consensus to just focus on Connect routes right now. And then I would love to, as soon as we're done with this conversation, start the conversation about UNT routes and get on that as well, even if we're rolling that out, 6 months later, in order to align with the academic calendar. I'd love to
Separate task in the current scope for UNT route planning. It's a different animal than
Okay.
transit planning. Largely because their mission is to get kids to class on time, get them safely and manage parking.
Do you feel like that's not a realistic timeline to?
No, I think it is. I think
Okay.
we'll have good feedback data from the implementation of this, and we'll have a lot of data and alternatives to review with UNT staff in the interim.
And I think that's an important distinction with the UNT service, is that we operate under a service contract. And so we engage them as a customer of ours.
Mhm.
And so certainly our job is to keep this board apprised of what's happening and keep our customer apprised of what's happening. And we've done a good job of that so far. But I guess to make clear on expectations, don't expect to see a lot of the sausage making, if you will, of the UNT shuttle network in this.
It's not going to be the same process
Right,
twice. They're two
correct.
separate processes.
Correct.
I would hope with the data that we have now, though, we could be a much stronger partner in recommendations to them. And that's, and I hope they take that. Right.
They have been nothing but receptive to the ideas that we've had, and so just commend their CFO and staff for all those conversations already. And yes, we're also have the benefit of recently NCT COG did a transit study that looked at where riders are going to and from and all that sort of stuff that we'll be able to summarize for you all in the near future as well. So we got a lot of good stuff to build off.
We have the first onboard onto off survey regionally wide at the route level since 2013 was delivered to us last month. So we're just getting our head into that.
That's
A lot of
fantastic.
data is where people are riding, who's riding, why they're riding, and how they get on and off.
Okay, so that's regard to phasing. Regard to frequency and hours. We had a member of the public come in and say that reliability was an issue for him, not because of on-time performance or wait times, but because it's difficult to navigate a system that's changing from day to day and time of day to time of day. So I would love to see us move in the direction of either consistent frequency or peak period frequency. You know, running Route 3 on 20-minute headways at 7 o'clock at night might be a waste of money. I'm open to that possibility. But I think that moving in the direction of greater uniformity would be a positive. And we can get down to particulars on that in our next conversation about it. Geofencing, I'm so excited to hear a conversation about, at the very least, not allowing go zone trips to begin and end both within a quarter mile of a stop. I would extend that to a half mile. But again, I'm really eager to have us have that conversation. Vice Chair Gilmore mentioned, you know, if we are going to remove some of that go zone capacity from Denton, perhaps it could be reallocated to Louisville or Highland Village. Another item I'd like to put out there for discussion is just covering the entire Denton city limits. Because, you know, I'm a Denton resident. I live in the city of Denton. I do my grocery shopping in the city of Denton. But I live just outside of the GO zone boundaries. And my grocery store is also outside of the GO zone boundaries. So I cannot use DCTA services to go to the grocery store. And yet when I go to the grocery store, my sales tax money is coming here. So I think, you know, there's a conversation to be had that you know, people who are residents of membership cities, regardless of what part of the city they live in, should be getting at least GO zone service. And if we're going to talk about geofencing, I think I'd like to talk about that as well.
That's helpful. Thank you.
I want to put a pin in a different comment. Circle back. I believe we fund roughly 30% of UNT services.
No.
We don't.
As we've dug into the numbers, the UNT contract covers the cost of service.
100%.
And we can, yes, and we can show you that through the budget process.
Plus your capital reserve.
Plus capital.
Right.
Okay.
So
I'd love to see those numbers because my history is not, obviously it's
Right.
right.
So obviously I've been on the uptake on a whole bunch of stuff over the course of last year, but my first blush at it says we're covering the cost of service.
Any other comments on this item?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I just want to say thank you all for the comments. I want to thank Tim for all of his work. All the stuff that you see on those slides is a result of his brain power and our consultants' brain power to figure out how we kind of tell this story. And so Tim has been a great asset to our agency over the course of all this transition in the last year and a half. So really thankful for him. Thank you, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you.
Moving on, item 5 is discuss Chief Operating Officer's 100-day report. Mr. Bell.
Yes, greetings, Mr. Chair and members of the board. I feel like I need to do some jumping jacks to warm up. I've been sitting in the bullpen. Today, I'm here to talk a little bit about my 100-day state of operations. My staff felt I probably should bring a sledgehammer or something with all the different things we've been talking about over the last several months since I started in January. But I'm going to discuss a little bit today about operational performance, safety, security, and risk, and of course, ridership experience. Starting off, right now, we all know what COVID has impacted public transit. And for us here, we're no different than any other transit authority that have really changed things from staffing and of course to how we perform maintenance on our vehicles due to, of course, the shortage of inventory of supplies and things of that nature. And so right now we are in that middle range of working through deferred maintenance items as well as the state of good repair. Obviously, a well-tuned transit authority has the ability of working in that state of good repair area and not dealing with the challenges that we are now experiencing in this industry. And so from facilities to vehicles, all equipment, our staff right now is working hard to try and bring our facilities and equipment up to par. We have several vehicles that are in need of significant repairs from engine, transmission replacements, things like that. And as we transition out of that, we will be working into the state of good repair area where we should be. So starting off with our vehicles, as you see here, this is a slide that's been presented to you in the past. Right now, we have a large number of vehicles that are starting to reach the average life of 12 years. And so right now, half of our vehicles, I'm going to say 27 of the large fixed route vehicles are running into 11.5. That starts to become a challenge. And when you're looking at the cost of providing service, regardless of the level of service that you have, when these vehicles start to age, they require a lot more maintenance. And so when you look at some of the numbers here, we have one vehicle in our fleet that has already surpassed that by 42%. And we have several others that have reached it and some that are starting to get close. So we're asking ourselves, as we start to plan for our facility plan, we're taking a look at things, we want to identify the true cost, the financial implications of it. You know, I'm not playing with house money, I'm playing with our CFO money. And so because we're in the process of looking at that budget, I'm putting it there. We want to start to make sure that we're looking at all different alternatives. Are we in a position where we need to start taking a look at alternative energy vehicles? Right now, a lot of you may or may not know, the average speed of our fixed route vehicles providing Connect service UNT is about 5 miles per hour. And so when you have that challenge on these diesel vehicles, they're not going into a regen process naturally. We have to force them in our maintenance facility. And that part starts to become costly over time. And so that's one area that we're taking a look at. You well know the cost of rail. We have definitely several different campaigns that are going on, overhaul processes that are a big focus. Our contractor is doing an outstanding job. We're looking for ways to try and reduce costs, but again, we want to make sure that we're playing around the lines of the FTA requirements and all the items that are necessary to make sure that the system is safe. So before we end up approving a lot of additional expenditures. So this budget time is a real important time for us. As you can see here, we're already looking out to FY30 with regard to some of the other overhaul pieces, as well as branding and wrapping of vehicles and talking about whether or not painting or wrapping is an issue. I think that's been presented to you in the past, but that is starting to become an item for discussion right now. We have one vehicle that we've got wrapped that's actually withstanding the test of time here. And so we're looking at other ways and what it's going to take for us to bring the rest of the fleet up to par. The next piece is ADA and access. This is a very sensitive topic for me because I started my career as a paratransit operator. And so when I look at this service, I'm asking several of these questions: the eligibility determination, the continued service eligibility, the trip negotiations, as well as the on-time performance. All of those areas are critical. Right now, our service, based on the fact that we are very small in nature, but we're serving a very low percentage of folks, I believe, that our communities has. We want to focus some more attention on this, and we have some positions in line to be able to do that. And we want to improve what we're currently doing at this point. Next part is yes, sir.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yes.
I think local businesses that serve special needs and
They've tried to
schedule go zone rides and then they get dropped. And these are people that like are trying to get the therapy. So when we get those calls, what's the best way to
Right now, of course, the calls coming into our ADA Access Center is the best. We can triage those and take those and discuss them with the appropriate people, even including the Go Zone side of customer service. That's one area, in fact, that we've run into several times over the last few months. And we're trying to communicate with those passengers and figure out what we can do best for them. We've actually in a position where we've had to move some boundaries in order to help some of our folks in that situation, because it makes perfect sense. We're talking 200 feet away from our particular zone. So it makes better sense for us.
That's
to help
exactly
that.
the situation in the cases I'm hearing
Okay,
is.
yeah, yeah. So
So-
those are the things that we're looking at on a case by case basis, and we're going to be tweaking our requirements in order to meet their needs.
So is that something we run through Mary or you said go to the
It's
special
gonna go through-
access?
It's going through our access program, yeah. And of course, you can call me. All right, then safety, security, and risk. We all know the true model of risk, and that's the identify, analyze, plan, monitor. But in this particular slide, I wanted to share with you two areas. One in particular, that slide, that photo here, and that photo here. Obviously, we're taking a look at all of our bus stops. And when you look at this bus stop in particular, I'm sorry that the pointer is not highlighting it. I'm looking at the safety location of this. And we are going to go through a process of reviewing all of our stops, ones that are no longer serving, other ones that we believe need to improve on ADA access in order to reduce the risk for our customers. In addition to that, taking a look at, of course, all of our platforms, all of our stations, and the facilities that we have, and making sure we have safe walking places. A lot of this stuff falls in line with our Director of Safety, Mr. Goodwin, and we're going to be working together to be able to enhance what we have to make sure that our employees and our customers are being safe on the system. The next one, of course, is security. This is an example of a safety campaign that I've been involved to in the past. Creating awareness for operators creates a lot of opportunity to improve things that they're doing that they don't realize. You're creating awareness to something that may potentially be a risk. And let's be honest, we're in the risk business. When I say that, we're in statistics. The number of operating hours that a driver drives on a daily basis, to me is a ticker to something that could happen. And so we want to stay in front of that. We want to bring that to their attention. So making sure that we have security systems that are adequate in the vehicles, making sure that access to our facilities is secured properly. We want to make sure that these funds that we're receiving from an FTA standpoint are being spent wisely and for the protection of all of our employees and customers. Now, the ridership experience, this is an important one to me. This part of the presentation, I might take a little bit of time on, so you have to bear with me. I'm saying new standard here because I've had the blessing of being able to be around the country in my career, my 30 some odd years. And I've seen a lot of positive things. I've seen a lot of challenging locations. And so, last presentation, last board meeting, we talked about the branding, about what DCTA is going to look like. And I think from an operational perspective, what you see here is a picture of course, two gentlemen on a rail platform. Their uniforms speak very positive about their professionalism and of course, what they bring to this community and the service. But that's not to where it stops. It goes to the cleaning standpoint of all the vehicles. It goes to how our employees are greeting customers on a day-to-day basis. We want to increase the transparency to our employees to make sure it's being felt by our customers. And so when I talk about standards, we're raising the bar. We're moving the goalpost so that we can achieve the best customer service as possible. We're not going to be Nordstrom's. We're not going to be the Container Store, someplace like that. But we're definitely going to improve what we do for the city so that we can increase ridership and improve the experience for our customers. That process I spoke to a little bit earlier, and that's employee engagement. Making sure that they're well aware that they play an intricate part in what we do on a daily basis, from the fueler washers to the mechanics, to the operators, to the customer service reps. They all have a role to play in this. Just recently, we had a meeting with the MTNC group, to all their employees there. And we talked about the partnership that we want to build. We want to make sure that they understand, yes, they might be in TMC, but they're really DCTA. And so part of that is making sure we're adding in technologies such as digital displays in the training rooms, as well as providing new announcement information on changes in location, whether it be construction, creating detours, to new equipment being installed on the vehicles. We want to make sure that they're engaged. And part of that is already happening with the help of our new general manager, Mr. Deshay, who you guys will meet next month at the next board meeting. But that engagement piece is a real big piece and one that has already started, and it's starting to pay some dividends. Next part is going into technology. You guys have already approved what I believe is a big leap for this agency, and that's the integration of Swiftly. But we're looking at other ways to make sure we're staying connected with the public, and that's utilizing some technologies such as Everbridge. We already know that the city of Denton utilizes it in emergency situations. I've had the pleasure of working with it in the past in other agencies, and I think it's a strong piece, not just for the public to receive information, but it's also a strong piece for our employees. We can better reach our employees in a lot of different ways and make sure that we're ready and prepared for special events as well as emergency events by utilizing systems such as that. The next one, this is a big one. You know, I kind of laugh when I do this because it really tells my age. But when you think about bus technologies from farebox to radio systems, and of course the CCTV cameras to the engine monitoring, that's basically what we have in our vehicles today. But majority of the agencies around the country have emergency alarms, APCs, and of course, external audio announcements to MDD terminals. Now, that has just been added on with the integration of Swiftly. But when you start to get into external LED displays, excuse me, and you're looking at other forms of advertisements of LCD displays inside a vehicle, and of course, traffic signaling priority. When you start adding equipment such as this, you start creating that transparency to the customer. And not only that, you also start to increase your on-time performance with especially the last one, traffic signal priority identification. So we are definitely going to be pushing the envelope on technology. That's one of the great things that I love about this agency and working with Javier, that we are definitely going to be pushing the envelope to find ways to be more efficient, because in the end, the operator feels it, the customer feels it, and our numbers will reflect positively about that. The other piece is you've seen our bus yard. It's a very unique layout, one that creates some challenges in regards to ensuring on-time performance. This technology you're seeing here is basically a yard management software example. And it gives us the ability to know where the vehicle is at any given time, when it's in the yard, when it's left the yard, and when it's returned. This is a very, very, very critical piece for us to ensure that these vehicles are pulling out on time and without having to rely on just radio communication or GPS. When you start to look at being efficient with staffing, as we've already talked about, and restructuring of staff, we want to make sure we're adding the efficiency in with technology. And so this is, to me, one of the most critical pieces right now that we're starting to look at as we look to the future. So with that, any questions, discussions?
Questions for Mr. Bell?
I really appreciate that last slide, because I've been with, when I used to work for Waste Management, I've been where they're trying to roll all these garbage trucks out every morning. And being able to manage that is like herding cats. It is really difficult and it's dangerous.
Yes.
And so I appreciate the thought going into that kind of technology. And the ability to know so that you can allocate dynamically throughout the day. Failures happen. And so how do you collect that?
The beautiful piece of that technology, you have the ability to be able to share it with fire departments and police departments.
Yeah.
And now our response time to situations have increased, and we're improving. We're being safer for our customers and for our employees. With our unique yard, our dispatchers and the staff don't have the ability of seeing what's on the other side of the wall, we call it, the Great Wall. And so this allows that without the need of cameras.
Thank you.
Welcome.
I had a question on the, can you go back to the, we had the- so those buses were probably sized for the power supply for when that bus was produced. Can you support, meet the power supply demands of all that other technology?
Well, the beautiful thing is, with the integration of LED and, you know, the low energy, it's a lot lower than it used to be. So I get that, yes, that is one, working with Gillig, they would be able to help us, since majority of the vehicles are Gillig, to make sure that we're meeting that and we're not exceeding it. So it is possible.
So does that mean underbody light kits are out?
As long as you don't approve the spinach.
Yeah.
Thank you for that presentation. It was great to learn and hear about so many things that are going on right now. We needed that. We needed that.
You're welcome. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Bell.
Yeah, I'd like to say thanks to Mr. Bell and his team. Talk about a transit professional who understands operations and can make impact on day one. Mr. Bell has done that, and I'm proud to have him on the team. So thank you very much.
Item 6 is your monthly safety service, ridership reports, informational reports. Guess I'll start. Attended the Regional Transportation Council meeting on the 13th. That was the meeting where the COVID transit funding round 2 was approved, and that was the funding that DCTA received. I have the numbers here. Yes, we received $1 million for construction of new bus stops. That was approved at the meeting. And also the expanded 8-train service hours. That was a $3 million grant to cover our operational costs to operate the trains longer during special events, such as Mavericks playoff games or Stars playoff games, or I think the other one was discussed is the State Fair Texas. I believe that was the other. But I think it's not limited to that. It's coordinating with DART whenever they're running their trains a little longer. We can run our trains longer during this pilot period, so that we can ascertain if there is ridership. And hopefully during this time, I hope our staff is able to market this and maybe we can help drive some of that ridership. But that was approved at the April 13th meeting. We talked about transit impacts and throughout the region, ridership is down 36% as of December 2022. But that's in spite of the fact that our ridership is up. So we're actually doing much better than our peer agencies in recovering from COVID-19. And on the 14th, we had our Dallas Regional Mobility Coalition meeting. I reported on our 1 million ridership. During that time, I talked about our ridership recovery and about the 2 grants that were approved the previous day at RTC. Those are my updates. Paul, do you have anything else? Want to talk about?
None for me specifically, Mr. Chairman. I guess I can use this to point to the informational report that talks about the funding that's received from NCT COG. Like you said, $1 million to relocate/rehabilitate bus shelters and build new bus shelters and amenities on the fixed route service network. We have an inventory of those existing facilities and need to develop a plan for how we move those things from places where buses are no longer operating to places where buses are operating. There's a significant amount of infrastructure in the Louisville city limits area. But before we move anything out of Louisville, we would be sitting down with the planning staff and the city manager to ensure that those shelters aren't being used by other people. Like, for instance, I see school children waiting at bus shelters to catch school buses. And so we want to rely on the city our city partners to make sure that we don't move things that are being utilized by other people, but maybe they just need to be rebranded at that point, repainted and formally transferred. And then the A-Train Extended Service Hour program, the opportunity to run the A-Train later should be considered for a number of reasons. Number one, I hear that a lot when I go into the public space. Anytime I go to a Colorpalooza event or Denton Arts and Jazz Festival or something, people say, hey, I would ride the train later. Those conversations were the genesis for us to have the conversation with the COG. Funding is one portion. The other portion is what is the operating plan and how do you accommodate later A-Train service hours with the freight operation and now the Silver Line operation that's going to be moving through there. So more railroad work to come, but this is definitely a good step in the right direction. It occurs to me over the course of these conversations that you have a Silver Line, today we have a Tex Rail service that the last train leaves the north part of DFW Airport after 1 a.m. The Silver Line will have the last train leaving DFW Airport at 1 a.m. And if we are part of the regional commuter rail network, DCTA will need to consider if this sort of operation is what we want to do long-term, especially if we're advertising to people, hey, 2-seat commuter rail ride from downtown Denton or Highland Village or Louisville to DFW Airport. So in a lot of ways, this is an important, necessary, it's not just a nice to have, it's a necessary step as we figure out what is our service going to be in the future.
Yes, go ahead.
On the extension of the A-Train hours, how is that going to impact the GO zone at Trinity Mills, if at all?
We will have to look at the guaranteed last mile service and what it was intended to do. And if the A-Train late hours absolve the need for that, then we would not want to duplicate that effort.
That's my knee-jerk expectation is that we're all done.
Right.
And then question on the Calhoun County Rides program is that meeting the contract service policy and the administrative fee policies that we have in place?
So we have not made any commitments on the Calhoun County Rides policy or program. We are going to bring a board item to this meeting next month. Mr. Bell, Mr. Deshay are getting together this coming week to talk about what would it take to provide that service. And then staff will develop a recommendation on how to ensure that our ability to provide that service aligns with the expectations of this board. Preliminarily, what we've told the Council of Governments is there is some administrative fee that is required, probably similar to what we do with our administration of the services for Trinity Metro, but then also an individual, a position funded to accommodate that as well. And so that's when COG brought this to us, and that's the way this came. COG calls us to say, hey, are you willing? We started the conversation there. And so in the next board meeting, we'll give you an update on that as we have the conversation about service planning. And then here's our recommendation, and obviously cannot move forward without the approval of this body.
Thank you.
Other questions? Okay. Information reports, we have on your package. We go with the future agenda items and board member requests.
Mr. Chairman, if I could just really quick on one of those information reports, just highlight that there have been some conversation from board members about wanting to talk about fare policy. And so staff put together a summation of where DCTA currently stands with fare policy. And the question was really asked in light of how do we get additional discounts for service agencies and where can we do free rides and all that sort of stuff. So what we endeavored to do is just outline basic background on what is a fare policy and why is it important? What's the law require? How are we set up today? Talk about fare box recovery, some anecdotal thoughts about fare elimination across the country. And then really the way to carry this forward is through the long range service plan. A segment of that needs to be DCTA adopting a formal fare policy that would then need to be revisited on a regular basis. And so this memo gives you the information that we have, the best information we have right now about how we do fares here at DCTA.
So this has not been approved by the board.
This is not a policy. This is just an outline about where the conversation about fare policy stands today. It's a welcome feedback.
Yeah.
In offline conversations about your thoughts on how to move that forward.
Yeah, I read through it. I was like, okay, so it's current operating procedure.
It's a current state.
Current statement. Okay. Any feedback, I guess, for the board directed to Paul on fare policy? there any board member requests for future agenda items at this time? Seeing none, next regular board meeting is May 25th, 2023. Report on items of community interest.
Mr. Chairman, if I may interrupt you again, I apologize. I wanted to point the board to the month of June, where we historically have had, or at least last year, we had a budget workshop and then a standard DCTA board meeting. So at your place is a calendar of what was given last year in December. Yeah, in December 1st, the December 1st board meeting. And this one integrates the NTMC board meetings as well. But what you see is on the plan is a DCTA budget workshop on the 15th and then a regular meeting on the 22nd. It seems feasible if the board were willing to make a longer regular meeting in June that would address budget workshop and the normal business items. Recognize that we're going to be in the middle of an intermediate service plan still, and so that could generate significant conversation, but it's really up to the board. If you all want us to schedule a standalone budget workshop on the 15th, we can do that. Or we can strive to consolidate it to the 22nd. And we anticipate the budget workshop to look a lot like it did last year, which is an executive level review of the budget. What's changing from year to year? What's the macro view for over the course of the next 4 to 5 years, directly to the point that Vice Chair Gilmore was making. So it feels like it could be accommodated in one longer day if you all were willing to do that and interested in doing that.
I'll say, I do have a preference for doing a budget workshop on the 15th.
Okay.
If staff's available for it.
I'm all for consolidation.
And I'm for consolidation. Obviously, if staff feels like it can be done, that's not putting anything extra on y'all. I'm for having it in one meeting as well.
Okay.
I'm okay with, we can do it all in one meeting. Let's talk together. Let's talk together. To gather everyone, to sync everybody's schedule. Not saying it in a bad way. I'm not saying it in a bad way. I love to hang out with everybody.
Okay. Well, if that's your direction, Mr. Pierre, that's the place that we can proceed with, and I'll look to Ms. Evans Jones. You're agreeable to that.
And if it can't, just bring it, tell us, it's
I will.
got too much. Tell us.
I will. We'll be shaping up or tightening up that June agenda here really shortly. So I'll let you. The thing that would drive the most conversation is likely the intermediate service plan that we just went through. So, okay, well, we will pencil in for just a consolidated one on the 22nd and let you know if that needs to change. Okay. Thank you.
Reports on items of community interest.
So, Mr. Chair, I would just like to, in one of our articles, congratulations to our Director of Safety, Bracy. Don't be hiding out there. Celebrated his wedding day on Friday, April 14th. And it was a beautiful day, wasn't it? Yeah, good weather and everything. Very good. Well, congratulations. And as well as Javier Tria, who successfully completed his second, I remember the first Boston Marathon at an unbelievable time of 2:50.56 is DCTA. Yeah, right. Give us an example of what that looked like.
It's a DCTA record for whatever.
And staff, DCTA staff was able to root him on from the DCTA boardroom. So congratulations to our employees. And that's all I have.
That's all.
Mr. Chair.
Anything else? Anybody?
I want to thank DCTA for the support of both. It was biggest numbers we've ever had, and we're really, really excited that 100%. All I've got to figure out is how to follow that weather. Yeah. I also want to let you all know that my takeaway from today is aggressive inertia. I just thought, I made sure to write that down, so thank you all for that.
Don't encourage Tim with his planning words.
That's all I have.
All right, seeing none, Joe, do we have any executive session?
We do not have an executive session, unfortunately.
Okay, unfortunately,
Feeling the love.
gosh. All right, is there any other business to conduct today? Seeing none. Motion to adjourn. I'll adjourn the meeting.
There it is.
Adjourn the meeting.
Further action.
Action
Taken here.
at 1:10.